Ahsoka, Balance of Truth, Book 2. Chapter 5. A problem? When have we not had a problem? Hera chimed in Ahsoka's ear, Ahsoka having little by way of retort. Hera, this is calculated, precise. It is designed, Ahsoka began, but was cut off right away. To draw us out, Hera finished for her. We've seen this before, we specifically, but this is on a galactic scale, Ahsoka. Ahsoka didn't respond immediately, lost momentarily in thought as she looked at the troopers resting solemnly against the hull plating and each other. It explains those reports Miera continuously mentions, she managed, shaking her head slightly. Knowing her response was less than groundbreaking, Ahsoka shook off a sudden wave of anger, knowing fully what sourced it. Your mind is its battlefield, Ahsoka, Tsar whispered. Ahsoka chose not to respond immediately, acutely aware of the lack of his insights thus far. My mind is far from something so demure, Tsar, she thought her response. Precisely my thoughts. We don't have much time in any case, Hera responded with an upper inflection of urgency and concern. Ahsoka entertained a thought. Hera, I would suggest Kawani and Sabine head over to that LC. In the meantime, Zeb and I will load our captives into the Phantom, she voiced into her comm, Zeb shrugging his shoulders in response to the suggestion. And me? Hera spoke sullenly after a few long seconds. Ahsoka watched as Zeb rolled his substantial yellow eyes in their sockets and spread a sarcastic smile. Better you than me, he said with mock enthusiasm. Sabine turned her head away from Hera in the cockpit as Kawani turned from the doorway. Slight smiles creasing their faces respectively. All of them waited patiently for Ahsoka's response. You're heading back to Lothal, because you are pregnant, have already endured one episode of intense cramping, and need to be ready to help me interpret my findings after we cross-reference our data mining efforts with this massive code cylinder in my cargo hold. Nadali broke the tenseness with her electronically modulated reason. And no buts, Hera. Spectre 7 is just as important as Spectre 1. Ahsoka winced along with Zeb in the Ghost's cargo hold, both thinking identically that Nadali may have laid it on a little too directly. However, without uttering a word, Ahsoka agreed that Hera could not talk herself out of that one. Hera didn't say anything in response immediately, knowing that Thebeskin was right, didn't take the sting out of her words. Sabine reached over to Hera's shoulder and squeezed it there. Kawani, suddenly behind Hera, did the same to her other shoulder. Both of them were willing to add further words of wisdom or encouragement if the need were to arise. However, realizing after a few seconds, Hera only needed their supportive actions. She lowered her head in the pilot's seat and took a long breath. You two get in position with R3. I've got the ship, Hera said, devoid of emotion. However, she reached up and touched each hand about her shoulder with a small squeeze of her hands. Ahsoka, let me know when you and Zeb are in position. She finished turning her voice back to the comlink. Zeb didn't waste a second, wanting to be away from the palpable tension within the Ghost. He tapped Kanda on the shoulder, motioning for the latter, and pulled Tovik to his feet, the later moribund requiring a full-on assist. Reading Zeb's lead, Ahsoka reached a hand down to Bren and pulled her to her feet. They ascended the ladder and padded toward the aft docking hatch leading to the Phantom above. Kanda and Bren secured themselves into their respective acceleration seats, and Zeb physically did the same with the listing Tovik. Ahsoka waited patiently, seated before them all in the lead seat, deferring to Zeb to pilot them. When all were secure, he strapped himself into the pilot seat. We are in position and ready for go, Hera, he updated. On your mark, Zeb, lock away, Hera returned with a mechanical cadence. Ahsoka could feel the exchange from solidity and stationary to free-floating zero-gravity as the various mechanisms finalized their duties with audible chirps and hisses. Phantom away, see you at rendezvous, Zeb said hurriedly before locking in the navicomputer with Raida's coordinates. Hera watched as the Phantom disappeared from both scope and view. You two be careful over there, she said with a little more feeling as she turned to the cockpit hatchway, her inner turmoil easing. Get us over there, then get out of here, Hera. We'll be fine, Sabine said with sincerity. We'll be right behind you, she finished with encouragement as Kawani handed her a helmet. Hera smiled briefly, then spun around to face the canopy before her, hiding what remained of the sting from Adali's comment earlier, one she knew was true. C1 peel off, ghost on approach, she commanded, alerting the initial Challenger shuttle to clear the light cruiser's port docking collar. With a simple exchange, the shuttle veered out of the way as Hera piloted the Ghost into position flawlessly and turned her attention fully to the secondary and auxiliary control panels to her left. She heard the audible clang and hiss of the outer lock seal breaking away from the ship and the hull lurch, cementing her knowledge that the seal between the vessels was engaged. Twin red lights flashing rapidly gave way to static green, all clear indication as Hera heard a rapid tapping on the outer hull. Sabine, no doubt, as the audio exchange rose in volume again with blasts of forced air and sharp hisses. She finally slumped into the pilot's seat and let loose all the tears she had held back. Attempting to disengage the magnetic lock through the flood of emotion, she felt every one of those tears fall down her cheeks. "I need you more than ever, Kanan," she whispered into the empty cabin, glancing at the co-pilot seat out of compulsion before disengaging the ship's lock entirely with the light cruiser and setting her navicomputer with her hyperspace coordinates. She eyed her original entry before clearing the field entirely and hesitantly entered the coordinates for Lethal. She distanced herself from the cruiser. "Hera, we'll be with you soon," Nadali voiced over the TACnet, a lamenting voice that carried both sorrow and apology. "Stay safe, all of you," Hera replied with complete solemnity, engaging her hyperdrive. "That could have gone smoother," Kawani stated a minute later. Sabine turned her helmeted head toward the Mirialan. She needed to hear it, whether she liked it or not. Sabine let escape a short exhale. "She's been fighting since she was a child, and she knows the fight is far from over. The only thing she cares about is life, Kawani, at her own expense sometimes." She let the words settle in as the two, accompanied by R3, made their way to the ship's command center. "She is tired." The statement hung in the air between them, becoming a tangible thing that everyone in the galaxy, in one way or another, could relate to. "We all are," Kawani responded in earnest, knowing the rhetoric-filled response was the only one to match the rhetoric-filled comment. Sabine smiled under her helmet. "You're becoming more Mandalorian daily." Kawani slipped on her helmet with a short chuckle, then turned her body, adopting a rugged and menacing stance. "I'll take that as a compliment," she said. "I wouldn't mean it any other way." Sabine returned as the two cleared the opened expanse of the bridge hatchway. Static filled Kawani's helmet before Nadali's voice echoed in her head. "I just need the uplink installed, Ani. I can take care of 98.3% of the exchange from here. Please hurry, though. We have less than 3 minutes." "Really? How often have we been through this, and you're still guiding my hand?" Kawani smacked back with feigned indignation. "Just ensuring the complexity of the task is formally understood by all parties, Ani. It is nothing personal." Nadali sounded in return, her voice stately yet subdued. The change of inflection was not lost on Kawani. "What is it?" she asked immediately, without pausing to retrieve her datapad and uplink the cylinder spike from the pockets of her leggings. "We have attracted attention," Nadali stated with a certain measure of immediacy. Sabine turned to Kawani while pulling up the ship's registrar of onboard munitions, fuel levels, and other available consumables. "What does that mean? Specifically, you two can't seem to go anywhere without attracting attention." Kawani, a blur of motion tapping between her datapad, the ship's central control access terminal, and the subsidiary communications suite, turned only slightly. "It means we have 2 minutes. R3, uplink and get ready for Nadali's access ping." Kawani answered as feverishly as her hands were moving. Nadali studied the attempted intrusion that had garnered her attention and signaled the host back to its source. "Coruscant," she said to herself in the cockpit of the Gozanti. A sharp static chirp through the cabin. "Did you say Coruscant?" The question came from Captain Larte. The modulation couldn't hide her surprise. "Affirmative, Captain. Locking in on the source as we speak." Nadali pondered for a second through her branching thoughts and the possible information that could be gained from a varying degree of different paths converging simultaneously. "Perhaps we could learn more about these initiatives if we let this play out for a burst period." There was no response forthcoming over the TechNet, most in wonderment over the possibilities they could concoct, and the others hopelessly out of sync with the context of the comment. "Follow that thought," Mira crackled feverishly, understanding they were running out of time. It will allow me to see where the directives are initiated, to whom corresponding actions are dictated, and by what degree any resulting response may be escalated. Hang on. Coruscant, ISBHQ, Office of Deputy Director Audenhone? Who the hell is Audenhone? And your uplink is ready, Nadali, Koani burst over the comm. Without a thought, Nadali executed the complex algorithm she had prepared for slaving the light cruiser to her whim, seating deep within its internal central core the authority to override all external commands or connections save her own. R3, execute. An affirmative ping through her neural implant confirmed he had done as asked. She is ours, Nadali said to everyone's relief. Now to see how deep the womp rat hole goes, she thought to herself. Miara cast her gaze in all directions after boarding the light cruiser. The scent of depleted blaster scoring and burned flesh was at once overwhelming. Her team had done an admirable job of containing those Imperials that had fallen to their own fire and removed the lot to the half-empty hangar bay. Naki, need your 20, she said with haste into her wrist comm. Officers' quarters presently. Heading back from the last hall to the hangar bay, he responded without hesitation. Copy. By the sounds of things, we'll have to deep six at rendezvous. Commander, you still with us? Doing her best to shore up any loose ends, Miara mentally ran through personal checklists to ensure everyone is on the same page. The undeniable gurgling intake of breath, heard through the entirety of the TACNEC, employed assured Miara and everyone else that the commander was ready. Awaiting orders, Mum, Aitorg responded with a fantastic amount of clarity. Hold defensive position, Challenger. If this situation escalates further, we'll need a line of fire to break out for separate jumps. Prepare your jump to rendezvous following the Dolly's lead. I'll stay with the LC. C1, let me know when you're home. Miara was sure she wasn't forgetting anything as she hurried to the starboard docking collar. If they were staying with the light cruiser, she wanted to ensure the second shuttle wouldn't be ripped from its magnetic mooring. The TACNEC crackled again in her ear. Onboard cams are feeding live to our audience at ISBHQ, in case someone had a message they wished to send. Nadali was awash in playful exuberance. Miara thought about it for a second as she came to a sudden halt in her haste. A camera ray moved ever so slightly in the upper right corner of a conjoining corridor intersection. Noticing it peripherally, she had a moment to mete out possible actions. Although Miara knew she should continue with her objective, she wanted whoever was watching to know it was her, a captain of the Rebel Alliance, a homeless veteran of a war for freedom. The Alderaanian turned to face the cam deliberately, revealing every inch of her face. She slowly lifted her blast tech GG-29, leveling it at the central photocell of the camera ray, snapped a crooked smile across her face, and pulled the trigger. The array sparked wildly for a few seconds before rocking on its mount and rattling to the deck plating below in a heap of twisted metal and smoldering components. Miara reholstered her firearm and bolted for the docking collar. Although upgraded and retrofitted to her liking, the Dolly's neural implant was struggling to keep up with the myriad data feeds she was actively manipulating. Breaking the light cruiser free of Imperial tethering while maintaining its connection to the entirety of the Imperial data network, coupled with running a masking routine that identified her cruiser and the new acquisition as the same, only made possible by the new appendage she had made specific to the task being utilized by R3. Although lacking in emotional response, she was far from devoid of the ability, as made apparent by the smile stretching from ear to ear across her face. The words to describe her elation were present and ready for use, but she felt no need to delve into personal achievement. The tasks immediately at hand, now complete, she recentered her focus on the extensive number of digital paths at her disposal, where they may lead on their own, but more specific to her abilities, how they can all tie together. Nadali watched the thread taking place in real time from faraway Coruscant, reverse tapping Audenhone's investigation, and found herself curious about his methods. He is meticulous, I'll give him that, she said to herself, inspired by the man's thought processes. She was enthralled and amused by the complexity of what she witnessed, following the intricacy of the algorithms and networks involved to allow an individual so far removed to respond so quickly to any number of incursions on a galactic scale. Nadali was particularly interested in the man's examination surrounding the irregularities involved with Bottijeff, irregularities she found to be counterintuitive. Her attention suddenly snapped away as a discernment was taking place involuntarily. An understanding was swift as all the specific points she had been monitoring began to sum themselves into a logical conclusion. With that understanding came the horrific sentient response and reaction that turned her stomach into a maddening, agitated roil. Using their own as bait? Although she still wanted to get her hands on the captured protocol droid, she was sure she had just divulged the query she would have posited. I think we may have underestimated the reach of this new protocol, Nadali admitted to everyone. A sickening wave of nausea washing over her. She had no way of articulating the urgency of her perceived danger, or the magnitude of what was transpiring through her digital eye. A cadence of signals at the Bottijeff terminus of the Imperial Network drew her attention back to the irregularities she had witnessed earlier. From her brief, although in-depth, perception of the enacting protocols, she understood that fleet orders coming from Coruscant were above reproach. That queried vessels would be unquestionably tasked with carrying out their objectives was apparent. However, those directives were either waylaid, redirected, or ignored outright. Fraction cells? She voiced the thought for her benefit. Or perhaps overriding directives from a separate protocol. She brought the idea to an end without any gleaned clarity. Whatever the case, the newly acquired light cruiser needed to exit the system. Captain Larte, may I request that the Challenger stay behind with me for a few more minutes? Nadali asked directly, yet with enthusiastic grace, into the TACnet. Nadali, that isn't the plan. We need to keep the vessels together. There would be limited defensive capabilities if there is an escalated Imperial response. You know this. We'll stay with you if you need more time, but keep it short. Miera came back immediately, her modulated voice direct and stoic. Before Nadali could respond, her synaptic link to the Imperial Network identified an upgraded threat through the digital battle between Coruscant and Bottijeff. Audenhone, or someone with access to his credentials, was overriding the commands being negated at the Bottijeff terminus. 2 Star Destroyers were now being tasked with responding to the Trunnion Moon incursion. Never mind, we must go, now, Nadali calmed back with immediacy. Incoming, she said while locking her navicomputer with Raida's coordinates. Affirmative, Farty. Captain, came the gargling voice of Commander Aturg. Affirmative, Commander, meet at rendezvous, Miera stated. Nadali watched through the open canopy before her as the light cruiser and the Nebulon frigate snapped themselves from view, enacting their respective jumps. Although curious about the intricacies of the network within her hijacked purview, she wasn't sure she could mask the identity of her liberated vessel from the probing eyes of Star Destroyers actively searching for her. She exhorted and slammed her palm into the hyperdrive yoke as the threat indicator on the tactical board lit up like a Coruscanti night.